Hi guys, today I wanted to talk to you about, being raised by a parent who consistently competes with their own scapegoated child. And I want to talk about how this shapes a person from the inside out when they come out of this type of, upbringing, this type of environment. So if we jump right into it, how does a narcissistic parent compete with their own child? Well, there's many ways. First of all, like if you've been scapegoated, you know what I'm talking about, is where they create this emotional rivalry or, this emotional contest with their own child, with their scapegoat. So, this is about the scapegoat having to, endure having their emotions consistently be competed against with the person who's supposed to be their caretaker, the person who's supposed to be their guiding light, their teacher, their foundation, right? A person who's supposed to provide love unconditionally. In families who scapegoat, basically the scapegoated child learns very young that their own emotional world doesn't have much value in these types of households, and that they actually have to fight for their right to feel anything at all, anything, like in the same way that a wild animal would have to fight to get food. This is how the scapegoated child has to fight for their own emotions to be able to exist, their internal world, should I say, actually to exist in this type of system. In fact, their emotions will actually serve as ammunition for narcissistic parents' constant need to assert their control and dominance over that child. It's like the child is forced to compete in like the Olympics or something against their own parent, every day. And at the end of the day, the narcissistic parent will win, and they will be standing on, with their golden medal and their trophy because they came first, and the child will get, like, they won't even get a participation trophy. And that's how it's like to emotionally have to grow up in this type of environment. And this emotional contest becomes completely normalized in narcissistic family systems, to the point where other family members don't even notice the punishments. They don't even notice anymore because they got so desensitized to the punishment that the scapegoat is consistently enduring all the time. The physical abuse and the silent treatment and the character destruction and the demonization and the never-ending silent treatment and the consistent antagonisms and so on. The soul-crushing guilt trips. None of that is no longer relevant anymore, because what happens is that at the end of the day, the scapegoat ends up being drawn into these debates of who suffers more, without there ever being any resolution or an end to the attacks that they have to endure. These debates are actually designed to go in circles and circles and circles and to distract from the real issues. That's what narcissists do. If they cause destruction, then they will use anything they can to make themselves out to be a victim and to behave as if what they are doing is actually warranted. Their victimhood stories and their self-righteous explanations that are used to excuse what they do, it has no limits. It never ends. They extend beyond the known universe as we know it. This is a weapon that they use to evade accountability, and a weapon that they use to avoid doing the hard work of personal development, and of course being held accountable for the role that they play in destroying other people's lives. And as a result, what happens in those families, well, the scapegoat grows up consistently being told that, first of all, that they're too emotional, because any emotion is too much emotion when you're the family scapegoat. I mean, you're not allowed to feel anything. You can't, because you're competing against somebody who already holds so much power in the hierarchy, in the family system, and whose emotional world takes absolute center stage, with no room for anybody else to exist as they are. And this competition will create a dynamic where the scapegoat grows up with their feelings being mocked and laughed at, by the narcissistic parent, and also by the people who enable them. This is something that I experienced all the time. I mean, during that time when I was, teenage years, and when I would cry in front of my abuser, she would smile and she would call me an actress. And because my feelings were surely an act, and they could never compare to her greatness, because apparently she was so empathic and so wonderful that she could, laugh at her daughter having panic attacks in front of her and crying and calling that an act. I mean, this is something that's normal, and I know that a lot of people that, have gone through scapegoating have experienced this type of abuse, this type of, competition that goes on. And, on the flip side also, it's not, the competition is not going to be just with, difficult emotions like anger or sadness, but it will also occur if the scapegoat happens to have moments of joy. If you have a good day, if you had an achievement, if something good happened to you, then that also will be competed against. I mean, the narcissist will either, either way, they will turn the attention back towards themselves. They will either say, oh, well, that's nice, I wish nice things happened to me, right? They will divert attention, or they will talk about how they also had an even greater achievement, and, something even better happened to them. And then they will take, the scapegoat's moment away from them. Aside from that, the narcissistic parent will also compete with their child intellectually. And this is also a really common experience for the family scapegoat. To have their own achievement, their own knowledge, as they grow up, as they get into their trade, or they go to school, or, they develop experiences with this and that, their experiences, their achievements, will be dumbed down and invalidated, especially if the things that they chose to do are not aligned with the vision, or if it doesn't play with that need for the narcissistic parent to have the scapegoat as their extension. So if you chose to do something other than becoming their extension, then any achievement, anything that you do intellectually, will also be seen as a competition. It's if you have knowledge in a particular subject, the subject itself can become a competition in the household. They will diminish what you know to elevate themselves, no matter what the topic. And if you have the audacity to point out that they're making a mistake, like if you're good at something and you know about a subject and you see that they're doing something, they're making a mistake, and you're like, hey, then, this is a mistake, don't do that, look, I'll show you how it's done. I'm talking about like a trade or something that you're good at, or you studied nutrition, or whatever it is that you're doing, and you're good at this, and you notice they're making a mistake. If you have the audacity, okay, I say the word audacity, to actually tell them that they're making a mistake, oh my God, they will shut you down so quickly and turn this simple act of you just sharing your knowledge into a huge fight, in which, again, there's going to be this vibe of this being a competition of you versus them. So essentially, no matter what you do, no matter which way you look at it, it's going to be always seen as if it's a competition. And there is an exception to the rule, though. They're tuned with change depending on who the audience is. If the audience is right, they will brag about what you're doing, about your achievements, just so that they can take credit for your work. Okay, in some cases, they might even try to take credit for your achievements and then making it seem like they're responsible for your success. You know, like you couldn't have achieved what you achieved if they didn't interfere, if they didn't do something. Again, it has to circle around them, but that's pretty much, you know, they will brag about your achievements when there's an audience if it makes them look good. But otherwise, you know, as you know, behind closed doors, the scapegoat is going to be completely discredited. Their achievement downplayed completely and dismissed entirely, and this creates such a extreme, like it's really two extremes, because then when you go out there, when friends come over, when the family social interactions are there, they will have a completely different image of that parent and who they really are, because they know how to portray themselves as good, and they know how to make themselves look good, and then as soon as they're gone, then they will revert back to who they really are. And it's this mask changing that they do consistently that really isolates the scapegoat on so many levels, because at the end of the day, nobody will believe them, even when you try to explain to them. You try to explain to anybody, like, oh my God, like this, my mom is always in competition with me for everything. I can't feel my feelings, whether it's career or emotion or anything else, it's always competition. And then the people will say, no, they always talk about so nicely of you. They're so proud of you, so it's impossible. It's impossible to again, they create an atmosphere of competition. Again, it's you versus them, right? That's what it is. And so again, aside from like emotions and aside from intellectual competition, there's other ways. There's so many ways, just like what I talked about just now, that the scapegoat is going to be set up through triangulation and comparisons. For example, the narcissistic parent will consistently compare the scapegoat to the favorite sibling and how wonderful they are, and they will continuously compare them to how miserable or dumb the scapegoat is, right, compared to the genius sibling. A narcissistic parent will have their devils and their angels. They will categorize, like, you're the devil and you're the angel, and that's what they do. They will consistently shift the people around them in these kinds of roles. And of course, as kids, you want your parents to love you, and so you will do anything you can to have their attention. So yeah, and other ways that they will do it, there's also comparing your physical appearance to other people or to themselves or whoever. The parent may constantly criticize you for how you look, for your hair, for your perceived flaws, your weight, your style, your choice style, whatever it is, how you present yourself physically. They will turn that as well into a competition. They will compare you to how ideal, their ideal version of beauty looks like, and they will do this consistently. And then eventually, if this happens during your adolescence, when it happens during your adolescence especially, this is such a dangerous, it's such a horrendous, adolescence is when you become conscious of your self-image, right? And then you have a parent that's consistently, comparing you to other people, creating this feeling like, even physically, the way that you look is just not worthy. So emotionally, you're not worthy. Intellectually, you're not worthy. Physically, you're not worthy, And then this happens with your hobbies and interests as well. Again, comparisons between, highlighting how other people are doing such great things with the exact same thing that you're doing, and how come you're not as good as them, Or maybe they will take up your hobby or that thing that you're doing, and they're going to do it, and they'll show you how much better they are at doing it than you are. That happened to me with cooking, actually. It's a really silly story, but, I invited them once, and I made traditional beet soup, because that's part of my culture. Beet soup is a traditional thing, And I was, tried, I made a meal that was sort of traditional. I was really proud of myself, and I served the meal. They ate the meal. And then a couple of weeks later, we went to their house, and she cooked the exact same thing that I cooked. It was the exact same meal. It was beet soup, and it was like other traditional things. And, so this, and then the comment, now this is how real beet soup tastes like, right? And she was like, this is the perfect beet soup. And like, what I did was garbage, basically, And of course, this incident is so tiny, and if you haven't experienced narcissistic abuse, this is like ridiculous to even talk about it, beet soup, right? But if you understand how it's like, and how these tiny little things accumulate daily, every single day, and this on top of all the other competition tactic that they use on their scapegoat, this little story is actually quite painful, because there's so much attached to that. You know what I mean? It's these little stories that just pile up one on top of the other, on top of all the other big stories and the big incidents that they do, and that all become completely normalized in these systems. And so you have to basically compete for your right to exist as your own person. And your entire upbringing conditions you to believe that you have no value just as you are. Even the way you cook isn't good enough. The way that you dress is flawed. The way your natural hair color there's something wrong with it. And, everything about you is wrong, because you're always being compared and competed against ever since you were a child. And at the end of the day, after having grown up in this type of environment as an adult, you may end up having, so much trouble figuring out who you are. It's like having an identity crisis, really, because it's a strange experience. It's like we know that we are not the narcissistic parent's extension, right? We fought against that really hard. That's why we became scapegoats, because we refused to become what they wanted us to become, because it wasn't who we were. However, so while we know what we're not, we also don't know who we are. We become trapped in this, floating in this middle point of confusion, really, of who we are and our place in the world, and really having a hard time figuring out what authenticity really means, And of course, with that also come serious self-esteem issues, struggling to believe in our abilities, and also setting absolutely impossible expectations as a result. I've heard a lot of scapegoats say to me, I just have to do this one more thing, and then I'll be ready for that thing that I want to achieve. I'm just not ready to go out there and put myself out there, because I need to work on myself more and more and more. Look, of course you have to work on yourself, and this is something that is ongoing and that we have to keep doing. But when are you really gonna be ready? You know what I mean? To put yourself out there. When are you really gonna be good enough? When do you feel like, when are you really gonna be good enough, to put yourself out there and to do that thing that you wanted to do, to go and, have, look for a healthy relationship, or get that, pursue that goal that you wanted to pursue, whatever it is. When are you really gonna be good enough, And, you might struggle to believe in your abilities because of this upbringing, and giving yourself these impossible expectations that you set on yourself as a result of this upbringing. And another thing that also could happen is that we'll become super hyper vigilant to signs of rejection and hypercritical of ourselves. It's like you may put yourself out there and you can start, you initiate your project or start a goal, but as soon as something goes wrong, as soon as you make a mistake, as soon as somebody gives you some sort of criticism, that will bring back all that trauma, that invalidation of the entire childhood. And that might be just enough for you to go, forget this, I'm not doing it, and to stop everything that you're doing. because all of a sudden that shame and those wounds come out of you never being good enough. And then that sort of acts as a wall. As soon as there's a mistake, as soon as there's some sort of criticism, as soon as there's an obstacle in the way, then that will re-trigger all these wounds. And then it becomes so difficult to actually pursue what you want to pursue, because we will zoom in on those mistakes and those negative things that happen along the way, as if that defines our ability to get things done or to be worthy of whatever we want to pursue. You know what I mean? So, what I gotta tell you after having gone through this, and I will always tell you this, is that it's so important that you change the relationship that you have with yourself. You have to start validating yourself out loud. You have to. You're the only constant in your life. You know the whole story of you. Your body knows the whole story of you. Your well-being is not dependent on outside factors, on somebody else's criticism, on somebody else's view of you. Your well-being is not dependent on things that you can't control. Your well-being is dependent on what you can control. And becoming aware of your wants, of your needs, of your passions, your values, and then making choices every day that align with, what you want for yourself. That really is your best revenge. That really is the best way that you're going to come out of this, is by starting to make tiny little decisions for yourself that empower you and that strengthen you. Not that feed that self-defeating thoughts, that tell you that because you made a mistake or that you're never going to be perfect enough to achieve what you want to achieve. What narcissistic abuse does to a person is that it makes us cut away at parts of ourselves. We start giving up on ourselves. We start giving up on our passions. We start giving up on our dreams. We start giving up on ever having loving relationships in our life. We start giving up on even little things, hobbies or things that we used to love doing, or having an adventurous temperament, curiosity, things like that. We kind of start cutting away all those parts of ourselves, and we start believe that we are too defective, and that internalized belief acts as a wall that prevents us from self-actualizing. That feeling, that backwards pull, it comes from the conditioning that we've been through as being raised by a narcissistic family system, okay? And you can slowly break through it by going against that feeling. This is really, really hard to do. This is very hard to do, but doing the right thing often feels incredibly, incredibly hard, okay? And the other thing I want to tell you is you got to stop beating yourself up. You got to stop beating yourself up. You can't fix everything. You can't always be perfect. You can't not make mistakes. It's not possible. You can't always know what to do, okay? We all make mistakes. And you do your best with the tools that are given to you. A healthy household would have taught you that your mistakes do not define who you are. They're just a normal part of growth. This is just, it's a normal part of life. So changing your relationship with yourself has to become such a huge focus on the healing journey, and realizing at the end of the day that nobody is perfect. Nobody has it all together. Nobody has it all together. This is a lie, okay? Everybody has a story to tell. Everybody has their own struggles. Everybody has their own hardships. It's a mistake in thinking that only you make mistakes and that only you are somehow not smart enough or not good enough to pursue that thing that you want to pursue. This is the only mistake that you're making, is by believing those thoughts. So, everyone starts off as a fool. So just be a fool and don't overthink it. Be a fool, don't overthink it. And do what you need to do to bring yourself where you want to go, where you want to go. You don't have to be perfect. You just have to be authentic. Okay? Remember that. You don't have to be perfect. You just have to learn to be authentic. You have to focus on discovering yourself and who you are, and allowing that part of you to come out and thrive and to be authentic. You gotta love and trust yourself. So if you love and trust yourself, you'll never go wrong. You'll never go wrong. And eventually you'll breathe fresher air. So I hope this helped you, and I'll see you soon.